So these past few weeks, we've been following the life of our ancestor Jacob. We could describe him as the one with all the family tsuris. He didn't get along with his brother. He deceived his father to steal the firstborn blessing. He plays favorites with his wives, Rachel and Leah. He had serious business problems with his father-in-law, Laban. He plays favorites with his children, leading to a terrible rift between Joseph and his brothers. He loses his beloved Rachel early on, and then he suffered what he thought for many years was the death of his favorite son, Joseph. So perhaps it's because Jacob is a tsuris-ridden patriarch that he's so interesting to us. After all, family conflict, losing loved ones, tsuris with kids, that sounds a lot more like our lives than the biblical Abraham arguing with God about Sodom and Gomorrah, or Abraham's, the Midrash, smashing his father's idols. It's a great story, but none of us really have an argument with God to save Sodom and Gomorrah. We're more like Jacob, I think. And after all, we're known as the children of Jacob, the children of Israel, not the children of Abraham. It was Jacob who became Israel as a result of a successful battle with his own weaknesses and all the difficulties he faced in life. So this week we meet Jacob after he had successfully separated from his father-in-law Laban, about to confront his brother Esau. It's been 20 years since Jacob had fled in terror from his brother's wrath. His encounter with Esau that we read this morning, a complete success. They make peace, they go their separate ways, and the Torah tells us that Jacob makes his way into the center of the country, to a city called Shechem. Now the language the Torah uses is this: Jacob arrived, Vayavo Shalem, in the city of Shechem. The word Shalem means whole, but obviously it's connected with the word Shalom. When you're whole, then you're at peace. So he comes in peace to Shechem. He arrived safely. The rabbi saw this as an opportunity to learn what shalom, what peace really means, what safety really means. All we have to do is look at Jacob's situation, and then we will know what the Torah thinks peace and security really means. So the rabbis go to work through the Midrash. The first element of peace, of shalom, the rabbis say, is Jacob's well-being, his physical well-being, his health. Before confronting his brother Esau, he wrestles with an angel, he wrestles with his own conscience, and he's wounded in the hip. In other words, he's damaged. Then he meets his brother, he feared, might have wanted to kill him. It was just a relief for Jacob to arrive in Shechem in one piece, that he got out of the wrestling match with his past and with his consciousness and with God, with an angel, and he got out of this encounter with his brother who wanted to kill him and eventually makes peace. He gets out whole and well. So the rabbis say the first requirement for peace is physical well-being, to feel safe. If you don't feel safe, the rabbis say, there's no peace. The second element of peace is that Jacob's family was not harmed. Imagine how frightened Jacob was when he heard Esau's questions about his family. Was Esau trying to identify them so as to hurt Jacob by hurting them? But Esau permits them all to continue. No harm comes to the family. Jacob arrives in Shechem with his family safe. That's another reason the rabbis, the Torah can say, he arrived in peace. He's now physically safe and his family is safe. So what's the third element? The Midrash talks about Jacob's possessions. The Torah goes out of its way to tell us how incredibly wealthy Jacob was. Even Esav, who does pretty well himself, is astonished to see the size of his flocks and his herds. Jacob knows that he had once stolen his brother's birthright. Wouldn't Esav want to exact vengeance by stealing Jacob's wealth? It doesn't happen. Esav contents himself with accepting the gifts, the payback that we talked about before, that Jacob owes him from having stolen the blessing. Esav is fine with that. The rest of his wealth is left undisturbed. So his possessions are safe, he is whole, and that is what the Torah means when it says he came to Shechem in peace. He's physically safe, his family is safe, and his possessions are safe. So he is shalem. He's whole, he's at peace. Not much more would we ask than to be physically well, feel safe, and have our family and our possessions secure. That would make us feel whole. But the rabbis don't stop there. And this is what struck me. They add a fourth element. Normally you're satisfied with three, right? No, they add a fourth element. It says that despite his traumatic encounters with Laban, the angel, and his brother Esav, Jacob's learning was unharmed. All that he had studied, all that he had learned was still with him. And that is why the Torah says he came to Shechem in peace, in safety. In spite of all his service, his frightening encounter with his enemies, both real and imagined, in spite of all the ups and downs in his life, the rabbis tell us he did not ignore his learning. He did not abandon his philosophy. He was not transformed into Esav. He remained Israel in his mind and in his goals and in his ethic. He didn't allow his difficulties to push his learning into the background or transform him as a human being. It stayed with him throughout the trials and tribulations and was as important to his arriving peacefully in Canaan as the well-being of himself, his family, and his possessions. That he could remain Israel, that he could remain Jacob, that he could remain, in our terms, Jewish. After all this service, the rabbis say that's the fourth element of wholeness and of peace. That his life of difficulty did not transform him or change the ideas he had received from Abraham and Isaac. So he arrives in Shechem whole, at peace and safely in the land of Canaan because he was well, his family was well, his livelihood was intact, and his learning was intact. He was physically and spiritually sound. Without his learning, without a sense of future on the land of Israel, with his father's and grandfather's teachings, he would not have been whole. He would not have been sound. Oddly enough, I think, we are closer to being at shalom in Israel than any other time in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict. We've had peace with Egypt, and it's held. We have the Abraham Accords, the single greatest accomplishment in the Arab-Israeli conflict after the peace with Egypt. Hamas is decimated. It's no longer a military force. It's an insurgency, but not a military that can infiltrate Israel, murder, rape, and burn. They can't even launch a missile. Hezbollah is on its heels, disconnected from Iran because of the revolution in Syria. There is no one to supply Hezbollah with weapons anymore. Iran is further isolated and reeling after humiliating defeats in her attempts to harm Israel, in her loss of Hezbollah, Hamas, and now Assad in Syria. And soon, I assure you, she will lose the Houthis as well. But peace is still elusive. Why? Because we haven't created all that the rabbis point out that's necessary for peace. There are still attempts at boycotts, sanctions, and divestment, BDS. And although they're failing in most places, and universities are now resisting them, and most businesses are resisting them, we can't let our guard down. Safety, we had no safety in Israel since October 7th. The invasion on that day took over 1,200 lives and 200 hostages. The constant missile attacks from Hezbollah went on for over a year until just a few weeks ago. If things go as they are now, Israelis who fled their northern towns, cities, and kibbutzim will start returning home. Reminds me of Jacob. Jacob was in exile, and finally he could return home in peace. And soon the Israelis who had to flee their homes, like Jacob, will start returning home in peace. The border with Gaza is secured, it's sealed, no more missiles will fly. When Hamas surrenders or is utterly destroyed, and a new moderate form of government takes shape in Gaza, that threat will end. The West Bank has its terror cells, but they are becoming increasingly isolated, and even the PA has launched a campaign against Hamas in the West Bank to drive them out. There's no more help from Hezbollah. There's no more help from Hamas. Controlling and even eliminating the terror cells in the West Bank will become easier and easier. Syria, I'm not sure who they are, but they don't have the weaponry to be a threat to Israel. And if they try to acquire it, the IDF will stop it on the spot. A sense of safety is returning to Israel. Iran remains the only major threat, but they are becoming increasingly isolated, and there's a very good chance America will confront Iran in a serious manner in the next few years, economically for sure, and maybe militarily. So if things quiet down and Israel's security is strong again on her borders, and inside of Israel, there will be an ongoing attempt to create peace with the Palestinians. The formula is not complicated. I know that America and the EU and the UN and a host of international groups think that they know how to make peace in the Middle East. But quite frankly, the rabbis knew much better. The only way to make peace is to ensure those very four things that we learned from the Torah reading happen. Physical safety first. If people do not feel physically safe, peace is impossible. That is beginning, but Iran remains the distant threat. The first condition of peace is an end to violence. The second condition, the rabbis say, is that Jacob's family was safe. That goes along with the first. It's not only that we want our soldiers to be safe inside our borders, we want our families safe, the civilians of Israel, whether they live in Israel proper or in the territories, to be safe, while the negotiations are going on to be safe when the peace agreement is reached. There can be no peace when our civilians, whether be it in Tel Aviv or on a disputed settlement in the West Bank, are not safe. So there must be an end to terror activity in Israel, and that can only happen with the final defeat of Hamas and Hezbollah. The third condition is livelihood. Jacob had to know that his livelihood was not threatened by Esau. One of the other parts of Oslo was an end to the Arab boycott of Israel and the general economic war against the Jewish state. The Palestinians never filled anything in Oslo. Not one part of Oslo was ever observed, so it's gone. It's a remnant of history. The attack on tourism and the Israeli economy must end as a condition of peace. That's what the Abraham Accords are all about. The end to the economic attack against Israel, and in fact, the integration of Israel into the Middle East economy. And finally, the idea that Jacob was able to hold on to his philosophy, his learning, his identity in the land of Israel, that was a key to arriving safely. We feared that the internal conflicts in Israel and the ongoing war in Gaza and Lebanon were undermining Israeli society. We feared that the unity of the Jewish people was being threatened, that the younger generation didn't have the commitment their parents and grandparents had in Israel, that the connection to Israel and diaspora Jewry was weakening. None of that turned out to be true. There is and will be conflicts in Israeli society. Show me a society where there aren't conflicts. And some of them are serious. But we saw that the commitment to the Jewish state, in spite of those conflicts, is even stronger today than it was before. And the connection to diaspora Jewry has been strengthened since October 7th. The rabbis were right about the true basis of peace: personal safety, physical safety. Know that your family is safe, that your economy will not be sabotaged, and you need to know you can preserve your language, your culture, and your identity. Then you have true peace. Those should be the ultimate objectives of both sides when they hammer out a peace treaty after these wars are over and the terror groups in Lebanon, Gaza, and the West Bank are neutralized. We are, ironically, closer to that peace than ever before for one simple reason. For the first time ever, Israel is being allowed to win the war. To win the war, and not negotiate a fake ceasefire to allow the other side to just regroup and get ready for the next war. For the first time ever, Israel has been allowed to destroy the enemy's military and even political power. That means that moderate Arabs who really want peace and prosperity can finally assert themselves, and the Arabs, Israel, and the West can unite against the real threat to peace, and that is Iran. Until that time comes, when all four of the conditions for peace are guaranteed, we will see calm and quiet, but not a real peace in the entire Mideast. It's as simple as that. What was true for Jacob and his enemy Esau is true for us today. But we are closer to that Middle East peace than ever before, because all that's left is Iran. It's not a small challenge, but it's now an isolated, clear threat that can be neutralized. So I think that's a great way to approach the Hanukkah holiday. When the Maccabees defeated the Greeks, restored peace to the land, and preserved the identity of the Jewish people. That's what the Greeks tried to wipe out, the identity of the Jewish people. And the Maccabees defeated them militarily and culturally and preserved Judaism to this very day. Tzahal are the Maccabees of this era and can bring that true peace to Israel and the entire region. So we enter Hanukkah with great hope that that miracle of the lights will repeat itself in this period of time and bring true peace to Israel and her Arab neighbors. Shabbat Shalom.